for another video. It's one of those origin ones that I'm doing. So yeah, this one has a sad origins and all that. And yeah, today was the 27th of January 2019, and about 74 years ago, Auschwitz was liberated and all that. So yeah, being the first major camp of World War II as such to be liberated and all that, took notice and all that. As Holocaust Memorial Day, HMD, is January the 27th, is National Commemoration Day in the UK, and others, dedicated to the members of those that suffered during the Holocaust and the Nazi persecution and many genocide since then, as I will be going over a few. First held in January 2001 and has been on the same day every year since. As the chosen day is the anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz concentration camp by the Soviet Union on the same day in 1945. And it is also chosen for International Holocaust Remembrance Day and some other National Holocaust Memorial Days. In addition, there are numerous smaller events around the countries organised by many different organisations, groups and individuals, and over 5,590 local commemorative activities took place in the UK for the Holocaust Memorial Day since 2016. And since 2005, Holocaust Memorial Day has been supported by the Holocaust Memorial Trust, a charity set up and funded by the UK government. And like the theme of Holocaust, and there's kind of many themes. Like the theme for the 2017 Holocaust Memorial Day was "How can life go on?" So yeah, going on into detail about a few things. And it's like the Nazis kind of singled the Jewish population out for complete annihilation, as the Nazis targeted for discrimination and persecution. Anyone they believed threatened their ideals for a pure Aryan race, as the Nazis believed that the belief of a categorization of people by race, and Hitler used the word Aryan for his idea of a more pure Germanic race, German or Germanic race. The Nazis believed that believed that Aryan people were superior to other groups of people, and their diversion was what they believed was racial purity, and their opposition to racial mixing probably kind of like explains their hatred towards like groups such as the Jewish population, Roma and Sinti people, often referred to as gypsies, and like black people. The Slavic people, like from Poland and Russia and kind of were considered inferior and were targeted because they lived in areas needed for German expansion in what was later be called like Lebensraum and all that. As the Nazis wanted to improve the genetic makeup of the population and persecuted people they deemed to be disabled mentally or physically, possibly both, as well as gay people, political opponents, primarily communists, as many people will know, trade unionists and social democrats, and all those whose religious beliefs conflicted with Nazi ideology. Like Jehovah's Witnesses were also targeted, so it wasn't just the Jewish population, like majority of people know. There's like thousands and thousands of people's lives were destroyed because of Nazi persecution, and many groups did not receive acknowledgement of their suffering until many years after 1945 and the end of World War II and all. And the Holocaust, or the Shoah in Hebrew, was attempted by the Nazis and their collaborators to murder all the Jewish population in Europe. And from the time they assumed power in Germany in 1933, the Nazis used propaganda, persecution and legislation to deny human and civil rights to the German Jewish population. And he used centuries of anti-Semitism as their foundation. And with the outbreak of World War II in 1939, Germany invaded Poland, subjecting around 2 million Polish Jews to the violence and forced labour that the Jewish population of Germany had previously suffered. As thousands of Jews were murdered in the first months of the occupation, and shortly after the occupation, Polish Jews were confined to particular neighbourhoods, what we now to be ghettos and all that. And living conditions in these ghettos were pretty bad, and were a deliberate attempt by the Nazis to cause death of the hundreds of thousands of Jewish people. And this approach was repeated across Eastern Europe and other countries across not the Nazi-occupied Europe. And in 1941, when the systematic murder of Jews began, a plan known to the Nazis as the final solution to the Jewish population became enacted, as death squad der Einsatzgruppen swept across Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union, killing Jews the Jewish population by firing squad. And by the end of 1941, the first extermination camp in Poland called Cherno had been established, giving the Nazis their method to continue murdering at a giant scale between 1941 until the end of the war, 1945. And only just on the population of the Jewish population of Jewish people, the Holocaust killed about 6 million men, women and children, and of that about 1 million of them were children who were killed in the ghettos, the mass shootings, concentration camps and extermination camps. So yeah, but that isn't the only genocide, as there have been many more, like in Cambodia, where a radical communist party called Khmer Rouge, whose leader was Pol Pot, seized power in April 1975 after years of guerrilla warfare. As far as I understand, Cambodia had been going through a bit of a civil war up until that point, as the Khmer Rouge imposed a program to reconstruct Cambodia as Khmer as under Kampuchea, which was the Khmer name, on the communist model of Mao's China. And he all aimed to remove social classes and Western influences from the country. And in 1975 kind of became known as Year Zero, as the population was made to work as labourers, and one huge federation of collective farms, as the inhabitants from towns and cities were forced to leave those towns and cities. And no one was particularly spared. The ill, disabled, old and young were driven out, regardless of their condition. And the people who refused to leave or did not leave fast enough, or those who wouldn't follow orders, were murdered, killed, kind of thing. As ethnic minority groups were also targeted by the Khmer Rouge. As these include those who were ethnically Chinese, Vietnamese and Thai. and the Cambodians and Chinese Vietnamese and Cambodians with Chinese, Vietnamese or Thai ancestry. And religion was outlawed by the regime, and the Cham Muslim population were essentially murdered as well, on top of about 8,000 Christians, as Buddhism had been eliminated from the country by 1977, and there were barely any functioning monasteries left in Cambodia, and all the civil and political rights were essentially abolished. As children were taken away from parents and placed in separate forced labour camps, as factories, schools, universities, hospitals were shut down, as lawyers, doctors, teachers, engineers, scientists and professional people in any field were essentially murdered, and together with their extended families, it was possible for people to be shot simply for knowing a language other than Khmer. They could also have been murdered for wearing glasses, laughing, crying. And one Khmer Rouge slogan ran, "To spare you is no profit, to destroy you is no loss." As the civilian deaths from the period were estimated to be over 2 million from execution, disease, extortion, exhaustion. I don't think extortion would have been a death. Okay, as from the sounds of it, they didn't exactly take well to money and all that. So from execution, disease, exhaustion and starvation. Yeah, so I'm going from that to a well-known one. It's a bit more recent. That took place about 20 years later in Rwanda, as in 100 days, 1 million Tutsis and moderate Hutus were murdered in the genocide of Rwanda. And as the genocide took place following decades of tensions between the Hutus and Tutsis, and a recent history of persecution, discrimination against the Tutsis. As on the 6th of April 1994, the plane carrying Rwanda's president was shot down, as extremist Hutu leaders accused Tutsis of killing the president, and Hutu civilians were told by radio and word of mouth that it was their duty to wipe out the Tutsis. And despite the massive scale of the genocide, it was carried out almost entirely by hand, using machetes and clubs, blunt force trauma. And the men who had been trained to massacre were members of the civilian death squads, the Interahamwe. Sorry if I botched that. Please feel free to tell me how to actually say it down in the comments. As a state-provided support and organisation, as politicians, officials, intellectuals and professional soldiers incited the killers to do their work, as local officials assisted in rounding up victims or making places available for the massacres, as Tutsi men, women, children, babies were killed thousands in schools and churches, and frequently the killers were people the victims knew, neighbours, colleagues from work, friends, and some may have been relatives through marriage. Yeah, it's I'm moving on to a year later in Bosnia, which was the second mass genocide since the Holocaust and the Second World War. In July 1995, Bosnia Herzegovina were kind of backdrop of going through a civil war, as Bosnian Serb troops and paramilitaries led by Ratko Mladic descended to a town called Srebrenica and began shelling it. Around 8,000 Muslim men and boys over 12 were murdered. So like if you're avid fan of history and all, you'd know that Bosnia was one of 6 republics of the state of Yugoslavia. As Marshal Tito ruled Yugoslavia from 1945 and succeeded in suppressing nationalist and ethnic tensions between the republics. However, after his death in 1980, nationalist parties began to gain power and the republics. And in the early 90s, Yugoslavia disintegrated into 6 states, essentially, and in which Bosnia declared its independence in 1992, but descended into civil war, as many countries have done over the course of their history and all that. As the population of Bosnia and Herzegovina consisted of Bosniaks, Bosnian Muslims, Bosnian Serbs who were from the Orthodox Christians, who have close cultural ties with like neighbouring Serbia, and Bosnian Croats who are Roman Catholics who had cultural ties with Croatia. As Bosnian independence was resisted by Bosnian Serb population, who saw their future as a part of a greater Serbia, and Bosnia became the victim of Bosnian Serbs' determined wish for political domination, in which was prepared to achieve by isolating ethnic groups, and if they deemed it necessary, by exterminating like other groups. As the Bosnian War resulted in the death of around 100,000 people and displacing over 2 million, somewhere around over 2 million men, women and children, as a campaign of war crimes or ethnic cleansing, and genocide was perpetrated by Bosnian Serb troops on the orders of Slobodan Milosevic, the President of Serbia, Radovan Karadzic, the Bosnian Serb leader, and Ratko Mladic, the Bosnian Serb commander. And in July 1995, Bosnian Serb troops and paramilitaries led by Ratko Mladic began shelling the town of Srebrenica on the 11th of July. He claimed Srebrenica and for the Bosnian Serbs. And a day later, Bosniak men and boys aged 12 and over were forcibly separated from women and younger children who were deported on trucks and buses, and the violence and killings culminated in a massacre on the 13th of July that lasted for about 72 hours or 3 days. And with over 8,000 Bosniak men and boys being murdered in and around Srebrenica, and many were shot in the act trying to escape, and their bodies were bulldozed into mass graves and concealed. As a genocide at Srebrenica is the largest incident of mass murder since World War II and Hitler and all that. And moving on to the final area of Darfur, which is a region in the west of Sudan, bordering Chad, in like the northeast Africa. And for the conflict, Darfur had an ethnically mixed population, around 6 million Africans and Arabs. And in 2003, a civil war began in the region between the sedentary populations of black African farmers a lighter-skinned nomadic Arab population, as the Sudanese government supported Arab militia, the Janjaweed, who destroyed and murdered thousands of peoples across a lot of villages. And the atrocities have been condemned as genocide by the International Criminal Court and by several governments around the globe and all. The Civil War was led by the deaths of around 200,000 to 400,000 civilians, although estimates do vary greatly, as the figure could be much higher, as the international peacekeepers and aid agencies and media have struggled to keep accurate records, to find accurate information. Up to 2.6 million people are still displaced in Darfur, and they have been forced to flee their homes to makeshift refugee camps in Darfur or Chad, run by international aid agencies. So yes, but Holocaust Remembrance Day started in remembrance of the Holocaust, and the genocide of the Holocaust and all that. But genocide is still going on and will be going on for the foreseeable future, if something doesn't exactly change inside us. So yeah, I'll see you all soon, and bye for now.